Here's a rundown of the key points from Quiz 6. So, this question, the Spartans and the Athenians, this is about, we know how the Peloponnesian War ends. It ends with a Spartan victory. The question is, does that come about as a result of the actions of the Spartans, or does it come about as a result of the failures of the Athenians? And either side could be argued. The point here is to make a case for it. Now, on the Athenian side, a major factor is the plague, as is often pointed out, and this reduces the Athenian ability to fight the war. It drastically affects their population. It also affects their morale and their sense of whether the gods are with them or so forth. The plague is a major factor, but in terms of what Athens does to lose the war, the plague isn't their fault. They don't know about germ theory, and protecting all the citizens of Attica by bringing them within the Athenian walls actually makes sense. That makes, all the Spartans can do then is harass the empty fields. They can't get at the Athenians, and Athens is safe from being besieged because it has the long walls that connect it to its port. It can't be besieged, they can't be starved out, and the Spartans have no capacity for blockade at that point. So the tactic there is logical. It's Pericles does exactly what is needed to save the Athenians, because the Athenian army can't be a match for the Spartan army. So what does Athens do to lose this war? Well, Athens is immensely arrogant and imperialistic at this point, to the extent of alienating their own allies by seeking to dominate and oppress them, to punish them for any deviation or an attempt to leave the Delian League. The most horrific example of this is at Melos, where the Molossians are given a ultimatum, either ally with Athens or be destroyed, and the Molossians refuse to enter in an alliance under duress, and so they suffer the consequences of Athenian atrocity. So this is the first part of that, is Athenian extreme aggression and hatefulness. The second aspect of this is the siege of the Sicilian expedition. The Sicilian expedition is a massive mistake. It's sent under the wrong leadership. It's sent under the wrong assumptions that they would be easily able to establish themselves in Sicily, where in fact Sicily is hostile to Athenian aggression and fights them so effectively that the Athenian fleet is wiped out. Thousands of ships are lost, and men are lost, and all is lost, is the report that comes back. And so the Sicilian expedition cripples Athens, and that is a direct result of Athenian arrogance and overconfidence. What does Sparta do to win this war? Sparta has no capacity to defeat Athens throughout this long war because they aren't a naval power. And so what Sparta does to win this war at the end, after this has been dragging on for nearly 3 decades, is to enter into a fateful alliance with Persia in order to gain access to Persia's naval ability. The trade-off for this is that the Spartans sell out the Greeks of Western Anatolia. They sell out the Ionians and the rest of the Greeks of Anatolia to the Persians, the very Greeks that had been liberated by the Delian League. The Spartans write off an entire nations of Greeks to be placed under Persian despotism, and this brings them the ability to win this war. The Battle of Agaspatomai is a naval battle that Sparta wins because of this Persian alliance. But of course, the legacy of this is the fury and hatred of all of the Greeks against Sparta for selling out the Greeks to Persia, and this has long consequences after the Peloponnesian War. about Alexander. Part of this is obvious. Almost everybody says the main point here, which is that Alexander does not designate an heir. But actually, what's important about this is why Alexander doesn't designate an heir. The main factor here is that Alexander is young and dies unexpectedly. And so he's not at a point where he's thinking about succession. He's still in the process of creating, this kingdom of Asia that he's in the process of building. He's still in the first phase of creating this vision that he has. And so he's not thinking at this moment about succession necessarily, except in the long term, which is to say that he has a child on the way, which he expects to take after him in the next generation, just as he is arranging for all of these marriages and looking forward to the next generation among all the people around him that combine the accomplishments of the Greeks and the heritage and richness of culture of the East. And so this is the first part. He has his succession is well in the future in terms of the son that he has coming to him. The second factor here is that amongst his generals, it's not simply that they're all ambitious and are ready to fight each other, but they're all at an equal level. They're all equally strong and determined, and so there's no clear one amongst them who is likely to be a successor. Each of them has come to this point as a strong and powerful general, and each of them has the intent to continue being so. So they're all at the same level. There's no natural, obvious choice amongst them, and Alexander has been making use of all of them to ensure that there are no favorites, to ensure that they all of them keep pushing their ambition in the direction of loyalty for him. Another factor here is that he had a protege who had died, Hephaestion. In terms of non-Alexander factors, the fact is that this great kingdom that he has created, even larger than the Persian Empire and full of all these different kinds of people, has very little in common with each other. It's all made up of peoples that are very different ethnically and culturally, and in terms of economy and language. And so this is something that took a good deal of time to create a stable system under the Persians. Alexander has not had the opportunity to create anything that binds all of these people together and to develop the mystique of a great king or anything other than this that creates a common identity. And so at this point, it is more natural, combined with the rivalries of the generals, for this great kingdom to break apart. Now, the fact is that Alexander's empire, is described as having thus come to a very abrupt end in a very short period of time. Alexander, spends only a few years building this and then falls apart. Seems like a failure, but Alexander's intent was not to create a vast political empire. Alexander's intent was to create a synthesis of culture, the result of which is the Hellenistic era that spreads all through the Eastern Mediterranean. Once absorbed by the Romans, becomes the entire tricontinental world around the Mediterranean, and in this he is successful. And so this is something that you want to bear in mind when thinking about Alexander and his legacy. He dies suddenly, and it breaks apart into different empires, but what he creates is not political empire, but the Hellenistic world. Now that you've read the whole thing, what is clouds about? Okay, so here. This is what I want to talk about. So, first of all, what is clouds about? There are a lot of things that can be said in terms of this. The main arguments, the main points that Aristophanes is trying to talk about is that Athenians are embracing new knowledge and new gods, which is taking them directly into moral chaos and the immediate degradation of Athens. This is what Aristophanes is attacking is moral relativism, the idea that morality is whatever you can convince people of. Morality, truth, right and wrong. The most important things in Athens at this moment, because the Athenians have become aware that mortals have responsibility for justice and for right and wrong. They can't rely on the gods for this. The gods have their own agenda. The gods are capricious. The gods act on their own instincts. The Athenians have become aware during this period that they must embrace and take responsibility for what is right and wrong, for what is just. But what is that? There's two possibilities. One is that what is right and wrong is what everybody agrees that it is. That's nomos. The alternative is that what is right and wrong is absolute and unchangeable. It's an inherent part of the universe and beyond the questioning of any mortal or any god. That's Pisces. And so both of these are new ways of thinking about justice and right and wrong that are denying tradition and the revelation of the gods. Aristophanes hates both of these things. He is primarily targeting the people that teach nomos, the people that teach the ability to convince other people of what you think is right and wrong. And what the sophists do is teach the ability to argue any point of view, regardless of its justice, regardless of its truth, because once people believe it, then it becomes the truth. And so the model for this in the play is Strepsiades has these debts that have incurred, and instead of honorably paying these debts, he seeks to convince his creditors that they are not to be paid. He seeks to use falseness to shed his own responsibility. And the second whammy for this is that these debts have been incurred because Athens is becoming morally degraded because of this, and Philippides has no moral capacity. Athens is being lost from the space of one generation to the next. So this is extremely urgent. It's happening rapidly. Athens is about to be lost. Athenians must act to protect their tradition and their gods. They must fight back against these kinds of new knowledge. And so he targets the sophists and makes them as ridiculous and as unworthy and covered in shit as he possibly can in order to turn the Athenians against him, in order to call the Athenians to arms. So this is Aristophanes embracing the idea of old knowledge, of tradition, and of reverence to the gods, which is what makes Athens strong, and attacking the sophists who turn their backs against the gods and tradition by teaching all of this ridiculous stuff that is shown in these very silly conversations in the middle of the play. And he's also attacking the absolutists, the people that believe in absolute truth, because that's also beyond the will of the gods. And so it's therefore also turning its back on the gods and tradition. And so he is targeting the philosophers who argue for absolute truth, the opposite of nomos. And toward this end, he takes Socrates, the representative and most famous amongst Athenians of these people that argue for absolute truth, and falsely portrays him as a sophist, someone who teaches the ability to argue from all directions. This is absolutely libelous and defamation of character, and so is a very neat example, ironically, of sophistry. Attempting to present and convince his audience that Socrates is evil based on a false argument. There are a couple of key moments at the end of the play that you really want to pay attention to, regardless of which topic that you're writing about. The first is the debate. The debate is critical, and Aristophanes makes this makes this even more intense when he rewrites the play. But the basic idea here is we have a debate between a character called Just Argument, which is, one of the students is taking on the role of making the just argument, and Unjust Argument, another student that is taking on the role of unjust argument. And so there's a debate that takes place here, which is absolutely in keeping with the sophists, that they teach the ability to argue from any point of view. And the outcome of this is that unjust argument wins. That unjust argument wins the debate, which is shocking and ridiculous in itself. But how unjust argument wins this debate is even more telling, because unjust argument wins this debate by responding to something that Just Argument had said about the potential for people to be corrupted, and the context for this is there's a very ancient tradition that goes back into the mists of time that says that, and probably not practiced anymore amongst Athenians now, that says that if you have been cuckolded, then you have the right to respond to this by taking a turnip, a large root vegetable, and shoving it up the ass of the man that seduced your wife. And this is referred to, euphemistically as being wide-assed, as having your ass opened up in this way. So when Unjust Argument responds to this remark from Just Argument, his response is, well, look out at the audience. It's already happening. He's pointing to the members of the audience and says, this fellow is wide-assed, and this fellow, and this fellow, and this fellow. It's already spread. The Athenians have already been ruined by moral degradation. And Just Argument says, I can't argue with that. And this is essentially the end of the debate. In other words, Unjust Argument's point is that the assumption about preserving right and wrong is that the citizenry is honest and can be trusted, and this new relative morality and this new moral degradation has already spread through the Athenians. It's already spread through the audience. It's already too late to stop it. At the end of the play, we have two critical moments of violence that happen in rapid succession. The first of these is Phidippides, the son, attacking his father and meeting him with violence and justifying this with the arguments of the thinkery. And this is meant to be shocking and provocative to the audience. The worst crime that you can imagine in a setting like this is for a son to turn violently on his father. And so this moment of shock is then knocks sense into Strepsiades, and Strepsiades turns and directs directs his actions against the thinkery itself. And in this moment, the critical moment here is Strepsiades repents of turning his back on the gods and tradition, and apologizes to the gods for having been bamboozled, for allowing himself to be turned against the things that had made Athens great, against the wisdom of the gods. He repents and apologizes and takes action and directs all the rage of having been conned into this new knowledge, and the result of his son having been turned into this monster. He directs all of this against the thinkery itself and destroys it. And so this moment of repentance, the key moment here. This is what Strepsiades is doing. This is what Aristophanes is craving, is for Athens to have this moment of clarity, to turn its back on this new knowledge, on moral relativism, on the teachings of Socrates, on all of that stuff that replaces the gods and tradition, to repent, to turn back to what it is that Athens is supposed to be. And Strepsiades here, as the everyman, as the ordinary Athenian citizen, had been baffled around and turned this way and that, and now is finding what it is that Athenians are supposed to be. He's the salt of the earth character. He's a farmer who is what has always made Athens great, and now he is finally finding what it is to be a true Athenian, which is to return to the gods and to act against all of these things that repudiate knowledge and tradition and the wisdom of the divine. Now, in terms of the essay, so what you want to do for the essay is you're comparing Clouds to another work. So you'll have two different works in your bibliography. Now, this work can be either Aristophanes, another play by Aristophanes, and you talk about whether Aristophanes is making the same kinds of arguments or whether he seems to be changing in the way that he presents himself, the kinds of motifs that he uses, or the things that he's trying to get across in the time between Clouds and the other play that you choose. And so you want to take three different things about these plays and talk about how they show up in one versus the other. And so this can be any number of things. You can talk about how the chorus is used. You can talk about the prevalence of misdirection, and false argument. You can talk about the presence or absence of authority. You can talk about the relationship between family members. You can talk about the use of violence. Anything that you can show as being, relevant to the two plays. You can talk about how Aristophanes remains consistent or how he changes. The second option is to compare this to a tragedy, and the reason for this is that Clouds is very much about figuring out what is moral, and ends with violence. The second thing that I wanted to call attention to in terms of the play is the fact that it ends in violence after all of this discussion of right and wrong. Strepsiades turns his back on debate itself and takes action and violently removes this threat to Athenian society. And so there are a number of ways in which that seems very familiar in terms of tragedies that also are about conflicts of morality and end in violence. And so you have a play like Antigone, for example. Antigone, has this resonance between two different characters, each of whom believes that they must do the right thing in terms of a third character who's died. One person sees that character as a traitor and shouldn't be buried in order to protect the city, but he's really acting on behalf of a grudge. And the title character Antigone knows that in order to honor the gods and not provoke their wrath upon the city, that burial rites must be observed and tradition must be resolved. And so we have this conflict of civic desire versus religion and custom in Antigone, much like in Clouds, and it also ends in violence. Likewise, Medea. Medea, has a conflict between two different characters, each of whom are betrayed by the other, and each of whom acts in petty ways that ultimately ends in violence that is justified by the play, much like the violence that ends Clouds is justified by the play. And so there are a number of other possibilities, but the idea here is to talk about how these two plays present the problem of figuring out what is moral, and how that relates to the choices of an individual versus the collective needs of society, which is part of the problem of figuring out what is right and wrong. And how the use of violence, seems like a betrayal to a reasonable discourse, and yet is the resolution in tragedies as well as in clouds. What is up with that? How does that relate to determining what is moral? How is it that this violence is justified in the context of figuring out what is right and wrong for the community? Your third option is to talk about Socrates as presented in clouds, the false Socrates as presented in clouds, and compare him to the Socrates that is presented in the works of Plato, Plato being Socrates' student. So here the vital thing to bear in mind, it says this in the syllabus, is that the Socrates in clouds is skewed as the result of Aristophanes' need to tear down Socrates. The Socrates in Plato is also equally skewed. It is the result of Plato's need to build up Socrates, and this is after Socrates has been killed, has been executed for irreligion and corruption of youth. And part of what makes that possible is clouds itself. The damage to Socrates' reputation amongst the elite ultimately leads to him being one of the scapegoats of the Peloponnesian War. And so the point is, the Plato version is not the truth, and the clouds is the false. Both of them are skewed, biased representations of a real Socrates that we can't get at all. And so what you want to talk about is how these two fictional Socrateses are portrayed, and take particular aspects, how he talks about religion, how he talks about morality, how he talks about the way to think about right and wrong in tradition. Take particular specific aspects of what he talks about. In whichever work of Plato that you use. The most prevalent choice is Apology, because it shows Socrates speaking directly before his execution, and he talks about the things that led to his accusations and trial. But you can also use Crito, which shows the actual lead up to the execution itself. You can use any work by Plato, because most of the works by Plato that show Socrates, the Socratic dialogues, has Socrates making arguments about what is right and wrong, and how this relates to tradition, how this relates to the gods, and so forth. So take three different moments from clouds, and compare it to what the Plato Socrates says in that fictional version of what the praiseworthy Socrates is like, and talk about how Socrates is being used to make a point by Aristophanes, how Socrates is being used to make a point by Plato, what those points are, and how they relate to the world of Athens, and why the Athenians chose to see Socrates as a threat. The multiple choice question. The Colossus of Rhodes is a very famous statue towering over the harbor at Rhodes, and was in fact one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The fundamental incompatibilities between Sparta and Athens. The key idea here is that all of the Greek cities, are driving toward an ideal, driving toward their own separate vision of what it is to be the ideal Greek. And so for Sparta, this is the hoplite warrior, and they breed in a society that's made up only of hoplite warriors. And for the Athenians, this has to do with commercial enterprise and creative expression and heterogeneity, the strength that comes from harmony and the contributions of all different kinds of people. For the Spartans, they see the Athenian vision as building greed and arrogance and this kind of thing. The Athenians see the Spartan point of view as also breeding a different kind of arrogance, an arrogance that comes from isolation, and arrogance that comes from thinking that no one else has achieved their ideal the way that Sparta has. Most of all, that Sparta has become stagnant, is unchanging, and the Athenians believe that the achievement of the ideal comes from how dynamic Athens is, from all the different forces, culturally, economically, and socially and creatively, that are transforming Athens generation after generation. And so the upshot is all the Greek city-states are pursuing their own visions. Athens and Sparta are the strongest and the extremes, and each see the other as being dangerous in their influence over the rest of the Greeks. The Spartans see Athenian influence over the other Greeks as tearing down, Greece itself, and Athens sees the influence of Sparta in exactly the same way. Their visions are mutually exclusive, and they're hostile to each other because they perceive the other vision as being detrimental to all of the Greeks. And so ultimately, this is what leads to the Peloponnesian War on a long-term sense. The short-term sparks of the Peloponnesian War have to do with the conflict between Athens and Corinth over trade power. But the long-term factors that make the Peloponnesian War happen is that Athens and Sparta each fear the vision that the other has and its effect on all the Greeks. This is a war that takes place over idealism, over philosophy. And it's the most detrimental and destructive war that this part of the world had ever seen. And that's the end of the quiz. Please email me with any questions.